Hi, I'm Joe Ford. We're in the Shogun studios with computer music, and I'm going to run through how to do some like neurofunk basses, and then how to throw that into a break and do some side chaining and just create a little drum and bass drop. Let's dive in. So, right, I'm going to dive right in. We're going to make a little bit of bass from Serum, do some processing in Ableton, and then at the end kind of try and incorporate that into a little small drum and bass drop. So I'm going to grab a little MIDI clip. Generally I like to do my basses in like a low F and then bounce that out into audio so you can resample it. So I'm just going to get Serum up here and work with that patch first. So I'm just going to loop a couple bars of F. I might get a little more there. Let's consolidate that together. Cool. Oops. Smooth. Cool. All right, so yeah, I like to do a fairly simple saw sound and then embellish that with processing later on. So I'm going to start with the saw. First thing I like to do is get a nice attack on it. So using an envelope here, I'm going to modulate the pitch of the saw. So if we go into the matrix, this is where we kind of see the modulators and what they're modulating. So as a standard, any modulations will go both ways from the original starting point. I'm going to make it unidirectional just so that it goes from a high pitch to a low. You can hear that really obviously if we slow it down. If we were to do it both ways, it would go below the original pitch, and we don't want that. So just quickly, yeah, this is a nice way to get a little transient on the start of the sound, and it makes an easier application for kind of making riffs. You can hear where the sound starts really obviously. So get a little pitch down there, going to bring it up to like 33 or something. Cool, so I want to create a little bit of modulation in the sound. I'm going to create a second oscillator, but instead of hearing that, so we're not going to send it to the output via this level knob. I'm going to turn that down and just use it as a modulation tool. So we're going to use the frequency of this oscillator to modulate the first one. So I'm going to go into this, I think it's a warp setting in Serum, and just go FM from B. So that means that this oscillator is going to be affecting this one. So via an LFO, we're just going to whack that around there, make it wrap either side of it. And we're just going to find a point at which it doesn't sound too hairy, but it's moving the sound a little bit. So essentially in this scenario, the second oscillator is, yeah, it's modulating the FM amount of the first one. So if I were to do it really obviously and bring it really high, in something like FM8, this would be the amplitude of the affecting oscillator. So in this case, I just wanted to create a little bit of movement quite low down, as opposed to making it really wild like this. And I've got just an LFO moving pretty slowly through the sound there. So yes, next step I usually do before anything else, make sure that my master is sorted out with a limiter. But beyond that, I just have a Pro L on the channel with some look ahead on it. This tells the compressor ahead of time what the signal is going to do. So if it were to peak, the Pro L can get on it before it does, and you kind of remove any audible distortion. So I like to just push it into the red, so we've got a completely flat signal. So I can do any crazy modulations and filtering, and it's not really ever going to clip, other than when we choose it to. So yeah, next step in Serum, we're going to do, there's a little trick I like to employ where the top end of these kind of neurofunk Reeses usually needs to be quite gritty. And to do that, I found that if I got a white noise and LFO'd it really quick, you can get some pretty cool sounds. So I'm just going to get some white noise here. Sounds pretty awful by itself, but if we very quickly modulate the level of that, we get a kind of gritty sound. I found that the less time that it exists at full volume, the more subtle the effect is. So if we were to feed that into the original sound, it would sound pretty wank. But if we bring that down, you get a nice like new gritty layer that you can use, and it kind of makes it sound less like a soft synth, and it gives it a little more kind of, I don't know, a bit of reality to it. So next thing is to do some post-processing. So I'm going to get one of my pre-made chains up. In fact, I'll do it from scratch. So I tend to use the FabFilter stuff quite a lot. So my limiter is always going to be at the end, and I'll do all the processing before that. I like to process the sound in various bands. So for instance, if I want to do something, I might want to do it just to the low end and process the high and mids separately. So to do that accurately, I set up these little chains. So I'm going to crossover frequency of about 150, and then I'm going to use Ableton's grouping functionality to basically split the signal into two versions. So I've got one here that's the lows, and I'm going to create one here that's the highs. I'll do it the other way around, so that'll be the highs there. Just make that high cut into a low cut. So then essentially we can just listen to each part separately. There's loads of stuff that you would like to do to low end, for instance, or to mids that you wouldn't want to do to the others. So it's a nice way of being a little more controlled with your processing. So I'm going to use Ableton's frequency shifter to create some notches in the sound. To explain what that does, I'll quickly make some movements. So a frequency shifter splits the signal into two and moves one higher in frequency than the other. That creates these filtery movements in it, and you'll be able to hear that pretty obviously here. And a great way of working out what something's doing to a sound is having a look at it. So this is Voxengo's span, which I use like every day, all day. It's such an important part of my production for mix down, sound design, all of it. Just being able to see visually what's going on and linking that to what you're hearing is crazy important. So in this case, you've seen these really obvious kind of notches moving through the sound, and I'm not having to do any automation or crazy stuff. I'm just having a little one plugin, just throwing it in, so the difference is. So this frequency shifter built-in plugin is proper useful. So basically you're creating two signals, one of which is going to be fully dry, one of which is full wet. The wet signal is going to be shifted by the amount that you'll choose. So in this case, I'm going to move it by 1.8 hertz. When you play those two together, because they're slightly different, they tend to phase in and out of each other. And as a result, you get this kind of really cool filtery effect. So if I were to make that nice and obvious, this is full dry at the moment, so we're just hearing the original signal. And as I move it up, we'll start to hear the filtery effect be more and more obvious. The most aggressive point will be 50%, of course, because that's half of each. And you can, if I speed it up, of course, the further away the wet signal is from the dry, the quicker the movements will be. It's kind of a really time-saving way of creating movement in your sound without having to. Normally, I would have to create loads of notches in the sound via an EQ, kind of do this and move them around over and over again. But this is a really nice way of just doing it really quickly. So I'll have an aggressive one to begin with. Let's put it at 1.7 or something, and I'm just going to copy that patch and move it maybe the other side by a little faster, so like minus 2.5 maybe. It's very quickly kind of starts moving the sound around, so let's just mute this rack. Pretty much just a saw wave, and now I've got this kind of really techy Reese sound quite easily. There's a free plugin from the Native Instruments chaps that I like to throw in there as well. It does a very similar thing. This is a phaser, which essentially is similar to a frequency shifter. You're going to create some notches in the sound and move them around automatically. You can see here, these two little notches are moving up around. I'll create a few more. Let's go 3, and this just kind of finds some wacky way of moving them around a little bit. Be a little more subtle with that one. So that's our first stage of processing. I'm just going to call that. The brilliant thing about Ableton is that you can create something like this, click save, and just be like, computer music, movement 1, and then if at any point a sound is a little stale or something, I can just type in here, computer music, and then there it is. I can just chuck it in, and I've instantly got even more movement going again. So, okay, next stage of processing, we'll do some distortion. An important part of the signal chain is in what order you do things. So In this instance, I've gone for some movement first, then I'm going to do some distortion, and then probably some movement again. And with Ableton, you can kind of just swap them around, see what happens, and start to learn what works in what orders. So I just wanted a little more movement, and to do that, I just created a copy of this original patch. So I'm going to delete this one. Just Control D, and it's going to move one of the same instance next slot to the right. So I'm going to move it slightly so I'm not doing the exact same thing. And I find the kind of range that you want to be moving in is somewhere between like no hertz and like 3 or something. Anything other than that, any faster than that, it starts to get a bit wacky. And when you try and use this in a riff later on, it's hard to discern what the rhythm is. So if I were to move it too far, for instance, that's a cool sound design sound, but it's not really usable in a riff. So I'm going to use 2.5. I'm going to actually put it minus 2.5. Yeah, that's just kind of embellishing the movement a little bit. So next thing up is going to be some distortion. So as always, going to put it before the limiter. That's going to be the last stop. I tend to do my stereo processing later on in the sound. So for now, I'm going to make sure this is in mono. And I'm just going to boost this up a little bit. It's going to sound a bit crunchy, but we're going to sort that out later on. Already sounding nice and aggressive. Next little tool is another great Ableton stock, which is Erosion. This, I'm not exactly sure how it does what it does. It seems to layer some like white noise with it, maybe it FMs it or something. But you'll hear the results pretty obviously. So I'm going to bring it down here. Get this kind of really papery top end that comes in. So again, as opposed to having it on wide noise, which will create a stereo signal, I'm just going to keep it in mono for now, and then be very careful with how I do the stereo later on. I'm just going to group those together so we can kind of very quickly move these things around and see and mute them. I might do a little more movement in the patch now. So it's obviously just an F at the moment. It's pretty boring. So I'm going to choose a pitch bend range here. Generally for this like neurofunk sound, the more aggressive the better. So we have the root note of F here. Let's just listen to that. Oh dear, that does not sound good. Let's play it. If I were to go to the octave +1, 13 semitones up, it sounds pretty aggressive. Those two notes kind of sound pretty great together. So I've set the pitch bend range to 13. I'm going to go into the MIDI here and do some movement. So this is our 2-bar loop here. I want it to move up on the first snare of the second bar, so that'll be up here somewhere, and then slide back down to the root. So let's have a listen to what that sounds like. I'm just going to copy that over. Just realized I didn't, it's important when you're doing FM stuff for the two oscillators to remain at the same pitch if you want it to sound clean. So the envelope 2 needs to go onto the second oscillator as well. Go onto matrix and make sure that envelope 2 is affecting coarse pitch of A and B in the same manner. So let's go 33 and 33. There you go. So that should sound a lot more in tune now. But it doesn't. Okay, I've got it going both sides of the pitch though on envelope 2, so I'm just going to make sure that's the same as the first. Cool. When we, old school kind of drum and bass Reeses are made by detuning two saws, and when the higher the pitch, the quicker the modulation would be between them. So to emulate that, we're going to make sure that when the pitch goes up, this LFO movement is sped up. So it'll go like this. It always sounds pretty badass. So in order to do that, I'm going to go into the matrix. This is where we control all the movements in the sound. So pitch bend is obviously going to control pitch, and as well it's going to control LFO2 speed. So I'm going to LFOs, LFO2 rate, and then let's have a play with that. Badass. Also the pitch bend is going to control the amount that we're FMing. So if we were to do this, it sounds a bit more exaggerated when it goes up. So I'm going to put pitch bend affecting LFO, oh no, so oscillator A, warp as well. So it's getting pretty complex here. So basically oscillator A warp is the amount we're FMing, and we're going to increase that with the pitch bend as well. So let's have a listen to that. One last thing to do, the pitch bend is also going to control a chorus amount. So if I were to, the chorus as standard comes with this low pass on, which sounds a bit weak. So I'm going to introduce the mix as the pitch bend goes up. So it's not going to happen while the note's down, but when it goes up here, we want the chorus to kick in. So basically this bit of automation is now controlling the pitch, the LFO to rate, as well as the oscillator A warp and the chorus now. So it's getting pretty complex, but it sounds pretty cool. That's all we've got time for right now. If you want to get the project and see the rest of the video, get the latest issue of Computer Music. Big up.